This is the longer part of the chapter 5, writing the research paper. What we won't be going into is at the end of that chapter, which I highly recommend reading that part, is about the MLA. We'll do a separate lecture on MLA. So when you're writing your research paper, after you've done your research, what you want to do is organize your notes. Get them in a proper order as to how you're actually going to use them. Know where and when you're going to be inserting sources, that type of information. Revisit your thesis. Uh, Make sure your research supports the thesis. Now, if it turns out that what you found as you've done research doesn't support your thesis, don't start a whole new paper. Just rewrite your thesis so that the thesis reflects what the research has shown you. Decide on a final thesis once you've done that. And once the organization is set, write down the final organization compared to the initial organization. So there, what I'm talking about, you should do some type of simple sketch of an outline that you should have done at the beginning to see if you're still writing and having information in the same place that you were going to have it from the beginning. And if you've changed it, have you changed it for the better? If not, then go back to the original. Now, drafting the paper, I highly recommend what's called backwards planning. This is something I learned when I was working in the marketing department for an internet company. Uh, is that you figure out where the final project is due. What day is that? And so, like with the research paper, my research paper is due, let's say, April 28th. And you know it's going to take you a week to write the revised copy, the final draft, after doing the rough draft. So you go back and say, so my rough draft has to be written by April 21st. And you know it's going to take you a week to write that rough draft. So you go back, well, then I need to start the rough draft on April 14th. And you know it's going to take you 2 weeks to actually do the research. So you go, oh, I've got to start my research then on April 1st. You see what I'm saying? So you backwards plan, figure out what your end product is and what the steps are to get to that end product, and then figure out how much time it's going to take for each one and work back as to when you're actually going to have to start the project. All right, document as you go. I highly recommend this. As you know you're going to use sources, just do their citation. And if you're using the databases of the school, usually at the end of each article, there's the citation. So just copy and paste that onto into a Word document. And what's good about that is that by the time you get done with the paper, uh, the last thing you want to do is a works cited page. But if you've documented as you've gone along, all you have to do is alphabetize it, and your works cited page is done. Right? So that's why I say to document as you go. Now make sure that you use the proper tense. When you're talking about your sources, and especially the work of literature, it's always present tense. All right. Eveline in the story, Joy Joseph's Eveline is leaving. She's always leaving. She didn't leave. We don't go to past tense. She's always leaving in that story. All right. Make sure you stick to third person and make sure your style is formal diction. So no contractions. Uh, we don't want any colloquialisms like y'all. Uh, we don't want casual language, the type of language you would use when speaking to friends. We want formal diction for these things. All right, now when you're actually writing the paper, please be careful, especially with a literature paper, that you do not excessively quote. A lot of people fall in that trap, some of them because they're lazy and like, well, if I quote a lot, then I don't have to write very much. Well, that doesn't help you. That'll get you a really bad grade in this class. What you want to do is quote just what you actually need to support whatever argument you're making. Make sure you got a good intro. You want to draw people in. So when you're writing this, please don't think I'm writing it to try to get an A in this class. I'm writing it for my professor. Try to write it with an actual audience in mind whom you would want to read the paper. So you have to make it interesting at the beginning with the intro. That also establishes where the paper is going. Make sure your paragraphs are unified and coherent. So what I mean by that is that every paragraph has a strong topic sentence, and all the sentences in that paragraph support that topic sentence. So that's unified. And then make sure they're coherent, that the ideas logically tie back to each other. So sentence 2 naturally follows sentence 1. Sentence 3 naturally follows sentence 2. You're not jumping all around the place within the paragraph. All right, now use your source papers materials properly. Make sure you place your quotes in context so we understand why the quote's there. Use introductory tags such as he said, she argued, that type of thing. And then synthesize your ideas with the source materials. So the way you do that is you have a controlling idea for a particular section of the paper, and your ideas and the source's ideas integrate with one another to support that controlling idea. If you can, combine information from several sources instead of laying one out, laying out the next, laying out the next, and just not giving them any kind of coherence relationship to one another. Combine your quotes, paraphrase, and summaries when it's appropriate to do that. And always include your own analysis and ideas, and always tie back your sources to your thesis. How do these sources support your claim, your argument? All right, finish. Make sure you have an effective conclusion. There's different types of conclusions. You can just expand on your claim. This is what I always did. I tended to restate my thesis and one or two of the main pieces of evidence I provided to support that thesis. You can have an effective quotation if that works for you. If in another class you're doing like an issue on a problem, then you can give emphasis for why your solution is the best, or you may have a call to action. You want people to do something after reading your paper, like you're writing on global climate change and you want them to go out and buy a Prius. I don't know, something like that. Now, what I don't want you to do in a concluding paragraph, this is very important. Do not include any new material. If there's something in your concluding paragraph that we haven't already seen in the paper, it's no longer a concluding paragraph, it's a new body paragraph, and now you don't have a conclusion, and that will kill you. Just don't trail off or simply stop like, well, it's a 7 to 10 page paper, I'm at page 7, I'm done, and you just stop without actually wrapping things up. Don't try to tell your readers what you've accomplished. Well, in my paper I have. Don't do that. And do not do that at the beginning. In this paper I will. That's really amateur. Do not do it. Don't offer apologies like, Mr. Probert, I know I could have done a better job on this paper. However, don't do that. How do I know you could have done a better job? And maybe you're selling yourself short anyway. And don't just have a vague 1 or 2 sentence summary of a complex issue. Your concluding paragraph needs to be a substantial paragraph. It's the second most important paragraph in the paper, other than the intro. Studies have shown that, especially in longer papers, people may not remember what's in the middle, but they always remember what's at the beginning and what's at the end of a paper. So they're your most important paragraphs. Now, also make sure you have a good title. I think I may have mentioned this in another lecture. I've read interviews with writers, professional writers, who said they spent more time coming up with the title for the short story than they did writing the short story. Your title's important. It's your handshake. It's, when you first meet someone, they either give you a firm handshake or they give you a little wimpy handshake, and that you make assumptions about the person because of that. Your title is your handshake with your reader, so you want to make sure you have a good one. Try to have it being entertaining and informative if possible. Always make sure it's relative, however. Now, actually integrating the sources. So you want to establish the source as a way to introduce the source. And you do this by using the author's name. If the author has a title that adds credence to the author, or if the author is unfamiliar, you may do that. And you always introduce the author with the first and last name. So John Smith, in his work, The Tales of the Crypt, says that. All right, so always the first and last name the first time, along with the title of the work that you're referring to. After that, always the last name. So after you've said John Smith once, then you just say Smith also says that. Smith then goes on to say that type of thing, all right? Use attribute tags such as says, states, declares, admits, disagrees, rejects, concedes. You know, try not to just keep saying says all the time, but make sure you don't misrepresent the source. If John Smith isn't arguing a point, he's just making a point, that's a lot different. All right, so you can't be saying John Smith argues that. No, he's just stating it. All right, be careful of that. Do not make personal opinion statements when introducing the ideas of another author either. Once you've introduced the ideas, then you can critique them. But when you're presenting them at first, be as objective as possible with that. Now, with direct quotations, you do that in order to maintain the clarity of a sentence. You don't always want the quotations. There's certain times. There's a weakness in the passage, and so you want a direct quotation so you can show how whatever is being said has got this weakness in it. You want to discuss the implications of the passage, so you need your audience to have it in front of them in order to understand what you're saying about the implications. Always quote accurately. I always, after I put something in quotation marks, I would always take this source and put it up to my computer screen and go word by word to make sure that I've done it exactly the way it was in the source itself. And if you need to add or change, what you can do is use brackets. So in this quote, the quote was, in this role, he was successful. Well, we wouldn't know who he was from that statement. So in brackets, I've changed it to Robin Williams. And the brackets tell me that this is something that has been changed and it was not in the original quotation like this. Now there's something else as well. If there's a misspelling or a grammar issue or there's some problem with the quotation and you don't want to change it, you don't want to put something in brackets, what you do is you put in parentheses SIC, sick. That means that there was, this mistake is not yours. You don't want a point taken off from your grammar on the paper because it's not your mistake, it's the source's. Paraphrasing, this is when you want to use an author's ideas, but not the exact words because there's no need for the exact words. And so you're placing it in your own words. Sometimes you're just trying to clarify complex ideas with simpler language. Or if you're writing about Shakespeare's Othello and you've got an older source that's using, English from the 1700s, you want to put that in more modern English. You're trying to interact with a point the source has made. That's another reason for paraphrasing. Make sure this is huge, use your words and your sentence patterns. You can't copy the original, so just switching up a few words. So the famous quote by John Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but instead ask what you can do for your country. You can't just change that to inquire not what your country can accomplish for you, but instead inquire what you can accomplish for your country. That's still the same sentence structure, and so that's plagiarism. All right, so you want to always maintain the sense of the original when you're doing the paraphrasing. And you always want to avoid plagiarism. So document any writings, both published and unpublished, any opinions and judgments that aren't yours, any statistics and facts not commonly known, images and graphics, any interviews, any letters, any emails, any public electronic communications, TV shows, movies, sound recordings, websites. All of those have to be documented. And there's no problem with that. I mean, you're supposed to be doing a research paper. We expect you to have research in there. And so, if you've got a lot of sources, that's perfectly fine. It's not going to make the paper weaker, but you have to document. You have to tell us where you got the information from. Now, when responding to these sources, make notes in the margin of the source. Write whether you agree, disagree, if you find something questionable. And always critique your sources for their accuracy. How factual are they? How timely? How new is the source? How thoroughly has it been researched? How reliable is it? And how good is the reasoning? Also, how current is the source? Has the source thoroughly researched the subject? Is the information reliable? Is the reasoning sound and logical? All right, and that gives you part 2 of chapter 5. Again, I highly recommend you read the chapter. There's lots of information in that chapter that weren't in my lectures.